Hi, in this video we are going to look at section 7.2 on weighted voting. So we're going to start with our guided notes here, where we talk about what weighted voting is. So there are some types of elections where voters do not all have the same power. Like when we vote for president, we vote for a candidate, but a member of our state's electoral college will cast the actual vote for president, depending on who a majority of our votes went for in our state. Each state has a certain number of electoral college votes, which is determined by the number of senators and representatives in Congress. So some states have more electoral college votes than others. So those states have more power than others. And that's what weighted voting is about. It's about power. For example, North Dakota has 3 representatives and California has like 30. So bigger states, states with more population, have more power. So to figure out power, we need to define some concepts of the weighted voting system. The individuals or entities are called players. So each of the states in our electoral college system would be considered a player. And the notation for the players is P sub 1, P sub 2, all the way out to P sub n, where capital N is the number of players. Now each player controls a certain number of votes, which are called the weights of that player. The notation for the weights are W sub 1, W sub 2, out to W sub n, where W sub 1 would represent the weight of player 1 and W sub 2 would represent the weight of player 2. Now, in order to pass a motion, it must have a minimum number of votes, which is called the quota. That's kind of important, the quota. So the notation for quota is Q, and the quota must be over half the total weights, but cannot be more than the total weights. So in other words, if you take all the weights and add them up, I can't highlight that, but if you take all the weights and add them up and divide by 2, the quota's got to be more than that. But it has to be less than or equal to the total weights. And our notation for a weighted voting system is, here we are, that we use the square brackets and we write the quota first, and then the weight of player 1, which will be the highest weight, and the weight of player 2, all the way down, so that would be 3, all the way down to the weight of player n, which would be the player with the lowest weight. So this is how we represent a weighted voting system. Let's go to example 1. It says here, a company of 5 shareholders, Mr. Lee has 30% ownership. Ms. Miller has 25%. Mr. Maddock has 22%. Ms. Pierce has 14%, and Mr. Hamilton has 9%. There's a motion to decide where to best invest their savings. The company's bylaws define the quota to be 58%. So what does the voting system look like? We're going to write it in this notation. So it said that the quota, which comes first, is 58%. So we're going to do a square bracket and write 58. That's our quota. Then actually, this should be a colon, not a comma. Then we'd write colon. So this is our quota. The weight of the highest player, which would be 30 for Mr. Lee. And then the next highest player would be 25. And Mr. Maddock is 22, then 14, and then 9. So if we added these up, they should add to be 100% because this is on a percent system. So we're going to look at the following systems in example 2 to decide if they are valid weighted voting systems. In number 2, or in example 7.2a, can I find my cursor? It says that the quota is 8 and the weighted votes are 5, 4, 4, 3, and 2. Well, one thing we always do to see if a system is valid is we add up those weights. So if we take 5 plus 4 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2, we're going to get 18. Now it says our quota is 8. and our total amount of votes is 18. That is not even half, because half of 18 is 9. So if we go back up to our way that a quota has to be defined here, it says that the quota needs to be greater than half of the total weights. If we add up the weights and divide it by 2, the quota's got to be bigger than this. So in example 2, the first part here, this is not a valid system. Because 8 is less than half the total. Now we're going to do a similar analysis of our second one here. Our second voting system has a quota of 16, and then the weights are 6, 5, 3, and 1. So if we add all these together, 6 plus 5 is 11, plus 3 is 14, plus 1 is 15. There's no way, even if all these players banded together, that they would reach the quota of 16. So this one also is not a valid quota. And that's our voting system, because 16 is greater than the total of the weights. And we look at these next ones. Here in part C, we have a quota of 9, and the weights are 5, 4, 4, 3, and 1. So that's 9 plus 4 is 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So the total of the weights is 17. If you take 17 and divide it by 2, you get 8.5. So 9 is within the range because it's greater than half and it's smaller than or equal to 17. So this would be a valid system. I'm going to ask you to look at these last 3 and check to see if they're valid, and then we'll look at them together. On part D here, if you add up, the quota is 16, and if you add up the total of the weights, we get 16. But it's okay if the quota is equal to the total. You just need everybody to vote for the same way for it to pass. That's called a unanimous vote. If we look at part E, my quota is 9. And if you add up the weights, you get 15. 15 divided by 2 is 7.5. My quota is 9. So 9 is in between the 7.5 and 16. So we have a valid voting system. Similar in number F, or on letter F, my total is 11. My quota is 8. Half the total, 6.5. So 8 is in between 6.5 and 11. So we have a valid voting system. Let's move on with some definitions here. For a dictator, veto power, and dummy. So a dictator is a player with all the power, who can pass a motion alone without any other players. They are called a dictator. A player that can stop a motion from passing is said to have veto power. This is usually one of the first players who has more weight, so you can't pass a motion without him. That's going to be a player with veto power. A dummy is a player who has no power at all. They are usually, well, there we go. There we go. A player with no power at all has dummy. Is called a dummy. So they are usually one of the last players in the row. Whether they vote for a motion or against, it doesn't matter because the motion is going to pass no matter what they think. That kind of player is called a dummy. So let's go back to our examples that we had from above and see if we can identify a dictator, a dummy, or someone with veto power in the following systems. Now, we don't need to look at system 1 or system 2 because these are the ones we had from above, and we identified these as being invalid systems. So let's look here and see in part C if we have a dictator, dummy, or veto power. So in order to have a dictator, the person would have to have a weight that is higher than the quota. So here at, or at least equal to, here at 9, my highest weight is 5, so it is not a dictator. Let's go to veto power. If we look at part C here and try to identify veto power, let's see. If we add, I don't think anybody has veto power, because if I add 1, I start from the back. 1 plus 3, I'm going to get 4 plus 4 is 8 plus 4 is 12. So if they've got veto power, they're one of the highest powered players. And since this motion can pass without player 5, because it only has to have a total of 9, this system does not have any player with veto power either. Let's look at the dummy. We look at part C. Here, a dummy. There isn't a dummy here because you could do player 5 plus player 3 plus player 1, and player 1 would be critical to pass the motion. So there is no dummy. So this voting system has none of the special types of players. If we look at D, there is no dictator because a dictator has to be able to carry the motion by themselves. So none of these players at 5, 4, 3, 3, or 1 have a weight of 16. But when we added 5 plus 4, 9 plus 7, we get 16. So all of these players are required in order to pass the motion. So all of these players have veto power. And there is no dummy because they are all required. Let's look here. Ooh, on E, player 1 has 10 and the quota is only 9. So player 1 is what we would call a dictator. And because he is a dictator, player 2 and player 3 are dummies. Because it doesn't matter how they vote. Player 1 is going to pass the motion without them. Now, if the quota were higher, that would not be the case, but it is the case here. Let's look at F. Yeah, so I guess if player 1 is a dictator, I should say he would also have veto power because he's a dictator. Now let's look at that F. Here is our quota. Our quota is 8. Now, if I just add these two players together at 4 plus 2, I can't pass the motion. I absolutely need player 1 here to get to 8. There's no way to do it without him. So he has veto power. Veto power. Player 1 has veto power. Let's look at player 2. If player 2 is not involved, can player 1 and player 3 meet the quota? 5 plus 2 is 7? Nope. So player 2 also has veto power. But player 1 and player 2 will make the quota without player 3, and it doesn't matter how player 3 votes. So player 3 is a dummy. And that's how we look at this. In our next video, we are going to look at the Banzaf power system. So thanks for watching.